afternoon. Welcome to another episode of School Leaders Podcast. In today's episode, we have Miss Sharon, Miss Neelam, and Dr. Nelius. We will be discussing what a quality lesson plan looks like. What do school leaders look for when quality assuring lesson plans? We will share best practices when planning effective lessons and advise teachers who spend a long time planning lessons. So effective lesson planning basically requires the teacher to determine three essential components: the objective of the lesson, what will they learn, the main body of the lesson, and a reflection. An effective lesson plan gets students thinking and allows them to interact and ask questions. So let me start by asking Ms. Sharon, what does a quality lesson plan look like?
Well, a quality lesson plan is, first of all and foremost, purposefully and intentionally planned. That means that we've got grade level standards at the forefront, and along with that they are aligned to these standards. And from there, that we've got an outcome driven based on the bigger picture, the roadmap of the year level at a plan. So that means that you're not just starting from scratch. You've got some pre-work that's already been done to help guide the lesson plan. There's definitely a clear progression of the learning in which the learners have multiple opportunities to do those essential things that we need them to do for here and for their tomorrow, which is read, to write critically, to think critically, and discuss their learning with peers in order to do something, to apply something with their learning. We've got activities that are scaffolded all the way through, and that allows for the teacher to fade back a little bit if they've done some pre-work planning, and they're able to see the learning happening in action, and they're also able to sit down and take a reflective pause with the class. They're right there, hands-on, to be able to offer those quick coaching moments along when the lesson is really moving along. And finally enforce what you had mentioned, Mosine, that there is some sort of closure at the end so that the teacher and the learners know whether or not they've been successful and that they can be independently applying those skills and the knowledge and concepts that they've acquired during that lesson.
To come in there with what Sharon has finished with. So it's looking at new concepts. So for example, introducing new vocabulary, but having a cross-curricular reference as well to literacy or oracy, looking at the different types of skills, embedding that into a lesson plan as well. And also to unpick off what Sharon said is about the activities. I think a lot of planning has changed now within the last year, bringing in technology into planning as well. So looking and reflective, the teacher to be a reflective practitioner, to bring in activities that again linking to the learner's needs. A lot of schools might have bring your own device policies, so how to look at writing, look at literacy, but as well as embedding technology into their learning, making activities engaging and creative as well.
I try and look at a lesson plan, and I always work backwards. I always ask teachers to define the attainment and the progress of a specific lesson. And if they can match the attainment with the curriculum standard, and they can match the progress that they want to have in the lesson, from there we work backwards, and then we establish what we're going to do for our introduction with our main core of our lesson, and eventually, the assessment at the end of the lesson. So within that, every teacher must define their own way of reaching that specific attainment level and that specific progress. Now this takes time. For a new teacher, it may mean that you will have to define this on a daily basis 10 times. For an older teacher that's been well established, these kind of things will then maybe embedded in a unit plan situation where you don't need to redefine this for you on a regular basis. But as I say, I always try and work backwards. People need to know where they're going and how they're going to get there. And I find that sometimes we are a little bit prescriptive when it comes to lesson planning. I believe that we are all creative teachers. That's why we are employed in these roles. And I want to give teachers freedom and to actually get to where they want to be. What resources will they use, et cetera, and that's up to them. If they feel comfortable using particular resources, then that's fine. I tend to look at a lesson plan a little bit more scientific, and I look at the end and then work backwards into from where we start.
One of my key elements for a quality lesson plan is the fact that I believe strongly that every child matters, and differentiation is really, really important and a very key component in any form or any lesson plan. I strongly believe that curriculum should be modified and adapted to meet the needs of all students. And as the sentence goes, quality lesson plan, the lesson plan should be of quality rather than of quantity. There's no point putting in 3 or 4 lesson objectives when in that lesson you're not going to be able to meet those lesson objectives because your target audience is not at the standard where you think they are. Another key components I would mention in a quality lesson plan is to analyze your data, as Dr. Nelius mentioned, looking at attainment and progress levels of students. Look at your audience, find out the attainment levels, find out the progress levels, and look at their baseline results to know exactly who your target students are, who are your gifted and talented, who are your students who need that extra support, as you would say, low ability students, and what are you going to do about these students inside that lesson. And it's really important for any teacher or any senior leader to make sure that any child that's inside a classroom, that the school has added value to their learning. And that's really, really important, value added learning. And I believe these components I've just mentioned makes a really good or quality lesson plan or a planning of a lesson. Ms. Neelam, a school leader, when quality assuring teachers lesson plans, what is it that you look for?
Okay, a lot of, as I mentioned, the change has happened. So it's rigorous, but it's looking at implementation of the success criteria and the objective to being a process-based learning. So some of the things you just touched upon there, Mohsen, is to look at the progress, how we can define and refine as well. And that could be as the teacher's going along in the lesson. It could be that document is used throughout the week, not just on a daily basis, to be able to annotate their teaching practices as well. So I look at the holistic view. If the teachers are understanding their learners, the learning will happen as well as all of these components. It's also a good basis to have a strong lesson plan that indicates the teacher's understanding, the teacher's efficacy, if you like, and effectiveness when they're working in their planning groups, to be able to understand behavior management as well and to be able to implement that in their lesson plan. So when I go around to observations or look at lesson plans, I do like to have a look at the detail, the understanding that the teacher has of their learners in that classroom. If progress is not made, how are they going to move those learners on as well? So looking at the data, looking at the class community as well, how the children are learning. And also going back to Dr. Nelius's point about looking at the end product, is looking at reducing the teacher talk, giving the students autonomy to become, learners of their own teaching, if you like, to have problem-based learning, to look at the solutions, to look scientifically at things as well, and to be able to introduce new concepts on their own. So looking at the flipped learning side of things, I like to look at that when I'm going around into lessons and certainly into lesson plans as well.
Yeah, from my angle, I always believe that a teacher needs to be able to verbalize a lesson. So for the newer teacher, I would let them actually come and explain to me what they're going to do with the next plan. And for every lesson, explain to me, they must actually verbalize exactly what they're going to do in that lesson. And I believe if a teacher can actually verbalize exactly what they're going to do for an introduction, core of the lesson, assessment of the lesson, and how they will incorporate everybody in the lesson, then they actually know how to present the lesson from there, and they can make a couple of bullet points on their lesson plan. I don't believe in lengthy lesson plans. I don't believe that we all spend 5, 6, 10 years at university to write beautiful daily 10, 20 lesson plans. I believe that if we can talk to someone and explain to them what it is that we're going to do in the beginning, that's fine. Later on, quality assurance for my well-established people in the school, as long as they can explain to me what the unit is all about and how they can adapt that unit within the curriculum and where they are going. Your more established teachers, as you said before, they can adapt the curriculum because they know exactly where they're going to go to and how they're going to get there. For the newer guys, we need to focus them very specifically, and perhaps on daily and on weekly ideas. So yes, I like to focus people by those aspects I've just mentioned.
There are so many things that Dr. Nelius had mentioned that really resonates the bigger picture. However, when we're just talking about once we get down to the granular side of things, just with the lessons, when we're really talking about the lesson plans, every activity, the key learning activities that occur within those lessons, they really need to be designed with purpose to help learners to be proficient in the standards-based skill that the teachers have planned for. I look for a standards-based, clear learning outcome whose learning activities they clearly meet the standard that we're trying to address. So oftentimes when I go and I look at lessons, I don't want to see them as isolated activities. They really need to be able to support what that end goal, what that outcome is, and how it points directly back to that standard. I look for evidence of what the class is going to learn together, so that individual learners, by the time that they leave, that skill is secured and that they have the independence to be able to go and practice that skill, and also for them to be able to show what they know and what they're able to do with that learning. I looked for planned opportunities so that we do see the purposeful reading, we see the writing critically, we see the thinking critically, we see the planned opportunities for discussion. And I believe that Ms. Neelam may have mentioned some of those things. We need to give kids opportunities to be able to think, to be able to wrestle. That's where the rigor comes in. And so in that point, the teacher, if they're well planned, well intentioned, that frees them up with those activities to really go and hone in on, what are my kids thinking about? What are those things that they may be stuck on that they maybe need to take a timeout or a quick call back to the group and really take a look at? Okay, remember, this is our learning objective for today. This is what I heard over here, and get them back on the right track so that at the end of the lesson, really, again, that those kids, when they move apart, can be independent. They can think critically on their own. And so they're able to actually apply what they're learning and continue to show that they are making that progress. By the end of the lesson, it really should be evident that both the classroom teacher, that content expert, knows that the kids have been successful, and that the learners know whether or not they've been successful, because you're keeping that learning outcome in mind, and it is tied to those standards. But as we'll see when we come a little bit further down here, it really can't happen in isolation. So those lesson plans really need to be the backbone of those clear, identified learning outcomes and those key learning activities as they point backward, like Dr. Nelius was saying, to the greater picture, which I'm sure we'll dig into in a little bit.
When I'm looking at quality assuring lesson plans, I like to look for basically making sure that is the lesson plan in line with the curriculum? Is it meeting the needs of all the students? I also want to make sure that are the 4 C's embedded, as you mentioned there, Ms. Sharon: critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, and is communication going on in the lesson? So let me move on to the next question. So what advice would you have or best practices can you share with new and experienced teachers when planning effective lessons, Dr. Nelius?
Yeah, this is always a very good question to ask, and it's a very good question for those new members of staff members. I believe the advice that I would always give a new staff member is, please do not work in isolation. Make sure you form learning communities. It may be learning communities within your department. It may be a learning community with other people and other departments, but make sure that you are working with experienced people and see what they do and take from their experience and incorporate some of their things. And you can work outside your school. These days, there are just so many platforms that we can actually work from. I believe new teachers need to really understand that they have quite a journey to go. I always say to teachers, remember, what you've learned the last 4 years may not necessarily help you tomorrow when you start your teaching journey. We need to understand that we need to learn from other people. These are skills. Teaching is a skill, and we need to develop those skills. And the only way we develop skills is from mimicking what other people are doing and learning from other people's best practice. Now, if you have a look at the established people on the staff room, they have a role of making sure that they've hold hands with the older staff, the newer staff members, and making sure that these people are on the right track. Do not fall into the trap of thinking, I know it all. This is a real great problem, and I see it every year. The older staff members think you cannot teach them anything. Now, for an older staff member, make sure that you have some sort of a reflective practice going, that you also link up with some other people at the same level and see if you can actually learn from one another. The greatest problem with older staff members or more experienced staff members, they don't know what they don't know. So somewhere along the line, we need to actually redirect them to find out what it is that they don't know, that they can all know what they have to know. So we need to establish for older staff members specific programs in schools so that they can actually also be developed. I think the last year or two has been a good example, especially with the online teaching. It's the older staff members or the more experienced staff members that have been so rigid in their way of teaching. They really struggle, and it's the younger guys that are more flexible and that have been adapting really well to the new style of teaching.
Again, Dr. Neely, as you pointed out, so many things from the different types of resources that are out there. And, you know, with any new teacher coming on board, they're going to feel overwhelmed when it comes to writing those lessons. And yes, at the start, it may seem quite daunting when you sit down for the first time and it's like all the learning that you had and maybe those 4 or 5 years leading you up to this point kind of go out the window. And so really, and we've talked a little bit about this already, being able to have that bigger roadmap, that sequence from whether it come from a curriculum coordinator or documentation somewhere about what those standards are, really getting clear on what are those grade level standards a year at a glance that you're going to be expected as a brand new teacher to really ensure that the kids leave with those, and they need to be grade level. And so everything begins with the grade level standards. You need to know your grade level standards. You need to be able to use them to drive what learning activities, those key learning activities, are going to occur, including the assessment in those daily lessons. And it's so paramount that we provide those opportunities every single day for our learners at the core, just to be able to practice, to be able to learn with purpose. So reading for a purpose, they really need to be able to provide those opportunities for our learners, that they are writing regularly, often, writing critically, that they're able to really truly discuss with their peers what it is that they are wrestling with in lines with what that learning outcome is, which again, it points directly back to that learning standard, those skills and the knowledge and content understandings that the kids really need to be able to be secure in order to be independent. They really need to be able to think about their learning metacognitively. And I think it was Dr. Neely saying, you can't have all these learning objectives, or maybe it was you, Mosine. We really need to focus on 1 or 2 key things, maybe even too much, really to secure those skills and that the kids really know what it is that they're expected to know and be able to do, and then to be able to apply when they leave so that they are independent in their learning. We need to be able to get kids back on track in their learning, so we've got to be able to start with those standards to drive whatever those key learning activities are. Same thing with intention, with experienced teachers. The experienced teachers, even if they've been doing this for a while, they have an anticipatory set of learning that maybe our younger teachers don't have, the inexperienced teachers don't have, and it's their responsibility also. Needs to be able to coach the unexperienced teachers and how to anticipate those things that may pop up along the way with the best well-laid plans.
Ms. Neelam, any best practices or advice you can share with new or experienced teachers?
Of course. I'd like to bring in, for new teachers in particular, and especially NQTs, or if you move into a different country, you know, there's a lot of change. So I'd like the teachers, even experienced teachers, to embrace that change, to bring the wellness into their teaching as well. If the teacher is feeling well and ready to deliver, then that has an effect and a high impact in student learning as well. Teachers, whether they're new or experienced, should not be afraid to ask questions. Always ask questions. Unpick the more experienced ones. Look to senior teams. Look to see if the culture in the school is having a coaching program or a mentoring program or a buddy system. And my main advice would be is to just ask questions on a daily basis. Even for myself as a teacher, as a leader, I felt that change is constant. It's happening at a daily, fast pace. So we have to be resilient. And I think that's, you know, as educators, we have had the resilience over the past year to bring in our own experiences, our shared experiences, allow students to reflect on real life experiences as well. Allow that time to be able to talk and bring that well-being into the classrooms. Like I said before, and as I've mentioned, once the teachers know their learners or their students, the learning will happen. And although there are gaps, and there will be gaps with you know, distant learning or hybrid learning or whatever learning mode the school is using, there will be gaps. I think for new teachers in particular, they should embrace the experiences, they should embrace the culture, look to see what the vision is, and to also bring their own element into teaching, bring what they have, their own creativity, their own personality into that teaching, and not be afraid. So my advice, going back to my points, is to ask questions, not feel afraid, to be resilient, look to change and adapt, be adaptable in your lessons as well, and always ask questions. And it's the same for the students as well, to have that effective questioning time for them, to have that downtime for them to be able to ask questions and bringing their experiences as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Dr. Nelius, in your opinion, do you think that lesson plans are a waste of time and consumes a lot of time for teachers? And what advice would you give to teachers who spend a long time planning?
Yeah, this is quite something that I struggle with a lot. I used to do a lot of work within schools. And when I get to schools and you look at what schools achieve, you can somehow draw a line from their end result into their planning. And the strange thing is, when you look at schools' results and lesson plans, somehow along the line, things frizzle out. I have seen schools with a 10-page lesson plan for every lesson, but these students have absolutely acceptable and weak progress, and the attainment is extremely low. And you ask yourself, why? Why is it that teachers are expected to write these lengthy lesson plans to deliver a lesson that is weak at the end of the day? First of all, elaborated lesson plans does not equate to a good lesson. People need to understand, who am I working with and how am I going to get there, and try and put that pen to paper. I find that in many cases and in many schools, lesson plans can be seen as a waste of time. I've worked with many schools where they say to me, why are we doing this? And they just do their own thing anyway. And for some schools, they actually draw lesson planning back to inspections. And during the year, they do as they please, and they rely on their normal knowledge and doing inspections that they have these beautiful lesson plans. And that is where a lot of the things come from, is people see a lesson plan as some sort of as an inspection tool, or that's a tool to show to someone how beautiful and wonderful and what we know about a lesson. And that's not where it's supposed to be. In my own situation, I encourage people to actually take a unit of work, and within that unit of work, they develop all the resources, all the types of assessments, and the ways that they're going to deliver the lesson within that little package. And then from there, you can elaborate. Now, if we look at lesson plans, why did we develop lesson plans? Where does lesson planning come from? Lesson planning come from, in my days, when I was a beginner teacher, and I do get the distinct feeling that I started teaching perhaps many, many years before most of you in this group. And in my days, we did a lesson plan for a very simple reason, and that was for that particular day when you were absent, then someone else could stand in and actually teach your lesson. So I've always had this mindset that a lesson plan is there for anybody to come and read and know exactly what it is that you wanted to teach. And sometimes it's not for your own direction. So yeah, I think that's sort of in a nutshell what I wanted to say about that. This topic of wasting time. If we know that I'm doing this lesson plan, that if something happens to me and I cannot be at work tomorrow, then someone else can actually come and teach this. So this 20 pages, 15 pages of all sorts of content which is not relevant to what I really want to do. We need to move away from that.
Yeah, I'll definitely just like to extend what Dr. Nelius has said. I think for me as well, just as a teacher, the process was quite rigorous. It was quite lengthy to have lesson plans. It was a tick box. It was criterion for inspections or formal observations, if you like. And I do believe now we have to reduce that workload of teachers. We have to have a meaningful purpose to why the lesson plan is there, why it's used, and why the teachers have to put in the information that somebody else, like Dr. Nelius said, if they're off, for example, could take that lesson. I think it's still valid. It's still valid to have a lesson plan, but maybe just a reduced version of a lesson plan, so the teacher is aware of how her lesson might go along. It could be used for teachers who require it for time management, for example, just to have a visual thing on their desk that they could refer back to. It could be used for new learners. I think in the environment that we're in now as well, we're having students coming in at different times of the term. They've been hybrid learning, or they've been distant learning, and they're coming in face to face. So just to have that record, or just to keep an understanding of what's going on throughout your lesson. So I do believe now things have changed. I don't feel it should be there for a daily requirement, but certainly as a tool that teachers can use to annotate, to keep alongside in their their work folder, or however they might use it, but just to have a reference point, really keep it quite basic, and to have an understanding of the students in the class and use it more for data. I think the data and the progress element, assessment for learning activities, I think that is quite a meaningful way now to use lesson planning, but definitely to reduce the workload of teachers. I feel we can come away from the formal lesson planning that we used to do.
To me, this was the best question of them all, in fact. This is the most fun part. The lesson planning is actually the most fun part, and let me explain why. When I looked at this question, the question could be answered in one of two ways. If we're planning in silos, and the only thing that we are doing is planning lessons without anything prior, and Dr. Nelius, you pointed this out earlier, yes, it's exhausting. I remember my first year as a teacher, and that's what I did Friday nights back in 2001. I sat on Friday nights. I thought I wrote these beautiful lesson plans. I had a brand new desktop compact computer, gateway computer back in the 90s. And I was just transferring my written thoughts over to a computer, and I thought that was the greatest. That was the best that I knew at the time with the training I had. And right now, it is the best part if and only if you have the roadmap, you have that backward approach already in place, that the prior work has been done. The lesson plan should be less heavy lifting, yet it's the heavy lifting piece for you then to shift the onus onto the learner. And that's where their heavy lifting begins, because you've already done the most critical part, the planning and preparation leading up to the magic that really happens with the learning.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to our lovely guests for joining me today. Please don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe to our channel. And until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.